Today I'm going to present what I consider to be the best example of ancient Hebrew writing in the Americas. Now, there are many examples, there are many artifacts that have been found which appeared to have Hebrew writing on them. Unfortunately, the mainstream science considers all to be forgeries. Among these are the Michigan relics, and that's a collection of hundreds, if not thousands, of relics found in Michigan that have Hebrew writings, biblical scenes, and so forth on them. There are also artifacts from a place called Burroughs Cave in Illinois, and that's at least dozens of artifacts that have Hebrew writings and symbols on them. And then there's the Newark Holy Stones and the Decalogue Stone from Newark, Ohio, and which also have ancient Hebrew typewriting on them. And then there's the Los Lunas Decalogue Stone from New Mexico, which also has Hebrew writing. Unfortunately, like I said, all of these have been considered to be hoaxes or forgeries in mainstream science. I'll address some of those artifacts in future videos and discuss the evidence related to each of those. But for this video, what I want to present is what I consider to be the best, most reliable example of ancient Hebrew writing in the ancient Americas, and that is the Bat Creek Stone. And I'll present why I consider it to be the best, most reliable example for Hebrew, ancient Hebrew in the Americas. And to do this, I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so I'm going to go through some slides, a presentation related to the Bat Creek Stone. And so the first thing to realize is the potential significance, which is that the Bat Creek Stone, if real, proves ancient Hebrews in America. The language on it is almost indisputably a form of ancient Hebrew, and the mound that it was found in is clearly an ancient Native American mound, and that mound clearly dates to Book of Mormon timeframes. So if the stone and inscription is real, it proves the existence of ancient Hebrew in the American heartland. The question is whether it's real or is it a forgery? So what I'm going to first do is let's go over the history for how it was found. So the Smithsonian in the 1880s was headed by a man named Cyrus Thomas. There's a picture there for you. Now, Cyrus Thomas, in leading the Smithsonian, he was very opposed to the idea of Native Americans, or the Hopewell in particular, being related to Israelites or the Lost Tribes. Very hostile to the idea. And but he was in charge of the investigations that went into in that time frame of digging into the Hopewell mounds and doing the recording the archaeological evidence. He hired a man named John Emmert to excavate Hopewell mounds that were in southeastern Tennessee along a creek called Bat Creek. And that's where these things were found, the items were found. Okay, so in one of the mounds, there were 9 skeletons, 8 with their heads towards the north, and 1 with his head. So there's the 7 there, and then there was 1 more, and then 1 with his head towards the south. The Bat Creek Stone was found under the head of the 1 skeleton that was pointing south. With the stone were some wooden bone pieces, a copper bead, and some bracelets. Now, at the time that the stone was found, nobody recognized that the engravings or inscriptions on the stone were Hebrew letters. When Emmert reported the discovery, he drew the picture of it with a stone oriented with the letters upside down. When Thomas, the supervisor, the boss, saw it, he thought, well, maybe these are some kind of Cherokee symbols or letters. It was a Smithsonian performed archaeological dig, so it was all authenticated at the time. Like I said, they thought that they were Cherokee symbols that were on the rock, And the stone was displayed in the Smithsonian for decades from that time frame. It was just always displayed with the symbols in the upside down orientation. No one recognized the stone's importance or what the symbols meant. Now, the exact discovery of this is a little bit unclear. I've heard more than one version, but my understanding is that there is a man named Cyrus Gordon, so a different Cyrus, around 1970 who saw the stone and realized that those are, he was a scholar in Near Eastern languages, so he realized that those are Hebrew letters. He informed them that these are Hebrew letters. And when the Smithsonian found that out, they removed the stone from display, saying, well, then it must be a forgery. All right, so let's take a look at the stone. So this is, the stone has this writing on it. Now, and let me actually skip through to see a little better. Here's a picture of the stone that's a little better. Okay, it's about 2 inches by 4 inches, 2 inches by 4 inches to give you an idea of the size. Okay. Okay, now in translating the Bat Creek stone, it's a little unclear exactly what it means. Cyrus Gordon translated something to the effect of for the Judeans or for Judea. And looking at the stone, so Hebrew reads from right to left. I will note I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I've just kind of learned enough to for the purposes involved here and in some of the other research that I've done. But anyway, Hebrew reads from right to left. Now, the beginning part by itself, this kind of makes a Q sound and a D sound. It has no known meaning by itself. Now, if it had another letter here, the shin, it would spell essentially kadosh, and that would mean to set something apart as holy. The second part here, this lamed, and I maybe mispronounced some of the names, but indicates 2 or 4, and then this refers to the name of God. So it one way of potentially looking at it is something 2 or 4. And this beginning root would be the beginning root for Judea or Judeans, which is how Cyrus Gordon translated it. So anyway, so it has clear Proto-Hebrew letters, but then it also has some additional things on it. This is an unknown letter here, and then the stone was broken off, so it looked like it was starting to add on additional letters, but that which got lost. Okay, now in academia and looking at the stone, the accepted position is what was set forth by professors Mary Quass and Robert Mainfort, and their conclusion or opinion is that the inscription is fraudulent, that it was written and forged by John Emmert, the one who led the dig, and that they think he got his letters from a Masonic treatise, and I'll show you the Masonic source that they think he got it from. So this is the Masonic source they think he got it from. They said that this was found in a book that would have been available in libraries at the time. So their theory is that maybe he went to a library, found a book like this, and then copied some of the letters. What this is the saying holiness to the Lord. So we have at the temples. Again, the first part, the Q sound, the D, and the shin. So this is kadosh, meaning holy or holiness, and then the 2 or 4, and then for the Lord or holiness to God. When you compare this side by side with the Bat Creek stone, what we find is that there are some similarities with the letters, although some of the letters aren't written quite the same. But there's some similarities with several of the letters, but there are significant omissions and additions. So, of course, this letter completely omitted, this letter completely omitted, Instead, you have this mark added, you have a new symbol added, and a new letter or symbol added there. Okay, now going back to the professor's argument, they first argued that Emmert, so the question is, okay, so if Emmert is accused of making this forgery, what would be his motivation to do this forgery? Their argument was that his motivation was to make a big find and ensure his job security. Well, that's a laughable argument because at that time, if anything, it would have jeopardized his job security because his boss, Cyrus Thomas, was hostile in very hostile way, opposed to the idea of a Hebrew connection for Native Americans. So if and Emmert knew that. In fact, there are letters between Emmert and Thomas where it shows them talking about this idea, and Emmert knew that Thomas was opposed to the idea of Native Americans being related to the Israelites, and Emmert also expressing that he too agreed and rejected that idea. So that's why I say that the Bat Creek Stone, one of the reasons that it is the most reliable and persuasive, least likely to be a forgery, is that we have writings by the individuals involved, particularly Emmert and the boss that he did it for, where they were both opposed and hostile to the idea of Native Americans being related to the Hebrews. So the fact that they're the ones that produced and authenticated, that found the rock and authenticated it, really goes against the idea that it would have been a forgery, because you're saying that it would have to have been forged by people who are opposed to the idea of what it purports to be. So we have in writings both Emmert and Thomas rejected the idea of a Hebrew origin for North Americans. Thomas was especially hostile to the idea. The idea that Emmert would help himself by making a big find is laughable. If Thomas had known this was Hebrew, if they hadn't, presented it upside down, it would have likely resulted in Emmert being accused of forgery or being fired. So that's something that would ruin his career, not help it. And the only reason it was accepted and displayed was because they had it upside down and had no idea it was Hebrew. And so this also goes against the idea that he wanted to have a big find is ridiculous, because in fact, they didn't even know it was a big find. They didn't know it was Hebrew. So their argument for a motivation is really ridiculous here, because there was no indication in any of the activities or actions of the people involved that they had any desire to have a find that makes a Hebrew connection, nor did they do anything to help people notice the find or get any publicity from the find. So there was no actions to point to the Hebrew connection or to get any attention or success from it. So the idea of it being a forgery by Emmert is pretty laughable. In addition, from what we know about Emmert, there's no indication that he was capable of forging the Bat Creek Stone and adding the additional symbols. So he would have been capable of copying the Masonic treatise, because that only requires copying, but it wasn't copied. There were additional Hebrew marks put on the stone. And there's no indication that Emmert had any knowledge of ancient Hebrew or related languages to be able to add additional letters on the stone. There's also not even any evidence that he knew of this book this Masonic treatise that they found. So it may have been in a library, but there's no evidence that Emmert ever knew of the book or used it. And then we'll look at and compare the additional things that are on the stone. Okay, so as I said, in comparing, there's two key omissions. Omissions could happen, I suppose, when somebody's copying, they could just omit something and not know what's going on. But the real key things are the three additions. And the key thing is to look at these 3 additions that are on the stone and figure out, are these potentially authentic ancient Hebrew? And do we have any way of knowing that Emmert would have known about these as being potentially authentic Hebrew? And the answer is that they do look like they could be authentic, and there's no evidence that Emmert would have known that. The first thing we're going to look at is this first mark, and it's kind of like it looks like it is used as a word divider mark, like a comma used as a word divider mark. And the question is that done in ancient Hebrew? I'll note that the source they point to say Emmert copied from doesn't have any word divider mark. It just has a space between the 2 words, sort of like what we do in English, just an empty space. Here, there's something there. Well, this isn't something that was known of to have been used among ancient Hebrews until after Emmert's and Thomas's time. And what was found is that more recently, when they have found Hezekiah's tunnel, which dates to 700 BC. And in Hezekiah's tunnel, they have found some writings. So these are Hebrew writings, authenticated and dated to around 700 BC. So this would be before Lehi's time, could be very similar to the type of writing that Lehi's people could have used later on. Now, the Bat Creek stone has this comma-like mark, and the Masonic Treatise didn't have that. Here's a picture that shows in this writing, they used these marks, and usually it was a dot to separate words in this, but sometimes it was much more like a comma. This is a little bit more, I'm sorry, the picture isn't better, but you can see that it's sometimes very much more like a comma. And so this supports the idea of this being something that could be authentic as a word dividing mark on the Bat Creek stone. This is not something that Emmert would have known, but it turns out in the time since the Bat Creek stone was found that this could be an authentic ancient Hebrew practice in writing. The second thing we're going to look at on the stone is this symbol here, which is this new symbol that's found on the stone. Now, it turns out that this also is a plausible variation of ancient Hebrew. And I'm going to point to now, this letter is called the Psalmic, and it's normally in ancient Hebrew, it would have 3 perpendicular lines. So this has two lines instead of 3 perpendicular lines, and it has an additional mark there. And we don't know what its purpose is on the stone, whether it's like a symbol of whether it's a symbol or a date, or we just don't know the meaning of it. But there is a cave near Jerusalem, and it's called the Beit Lehi cave. Now, there are some people that think that the cave could relate to the prophet Lehi. There are others that disagree and say that it's different than Lehi. But nevertheless, it is an authentic cave with authentic ancient Hebrew writings on it. And in that, we do see versions of the Psalmic with 2 perpendicular lines across as opposed to 3. In addition, there are some that think that the Mulekites may have been Phoenicians or relate to the Canaanites. And the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, Canaanites, and the Hebrews used a similar alphabet, but there were some differences. In the Canaanite version of the Psalmic, starting around 1000 BC, one of the versions was to have 2 and then a little bit something underneath. So it turns out that this symbol that's on the Bat Creek stone is a plausible variation of ancient Hebrew or Phoenician. Now we'll look at the third symbol that was the added symbol on the Bat Creek stone, and this is this letter there. Okay, this also is a plausible variation of an ancient Hebrew or Phoenician letter. Okay, so this letter is similar to the Phoenician letter Ta, which is the equivalent to the Hebrew letter Tav. Now, the Bat Creek mark may be a version of the letter. Now, for Hebrew, it went sort of like a cross or a T shape, and then kind of went differently like an X. But the Phoenician variant of it, they have the cross and the X, but then we're like a T with a downward stroke, or a leaning T with a leaning cross stroke. And interestingly, that's a little bit of what you see on the Bat Creek stone, a little bit of a leaning and then a downward stroke, although this one is on the left and this one here is on the right. But nevertheless, what this does is it shows that this is also a plausible variation of an ancient Hebrew or Phoenician letter. And then we're also going to look a little bit at the context of the find. So as indicated, when it was found in a Hopewell mound. This is a Smithsonian dig of the Hopewell mound. The mound was dated to the 100 BC to 400 AD time frame. The Bat Creek stone was found with some wood fragments and a brass bracelet. The wood fragments, when they dated them, they said that it dates between 32 AD to 769 AD. So far it all fits for ancient. And then there were the brass bracelets. Now, they said that the brass bracelets, and it was a C-shaped type brass bracelet found with a Bat Creek stone. And it was formed by a folding of the metal. The metal was folded and bent rather than made by making wire or anything else. And so here's just an example of a similar ancient bracelet. This one was made out of bronze in Israel with a similar folded and bent C-type shape that relates to ancient Israel. So all of these context things also point to an authentic find, an authentic dig. In addition, for the Bat Creek stone, there was now these people are related to the America Unearthed series, so Scott Wolter. But Scott Wolter's background is as a person who studies rock, so petrographic services. And the American Petrographic Services did do a study of the Bat Creek stone. And in particular, what they were focused on in their study is that there are old pictures of the rock and newer pictures. And what they found is that it was acknowledged that when Emmert found the rock, he hit it with a shovel, and he acknowledged it making this. So this was not originally on the rock, according to the find. This was made by Emmert's shovel when he hit the rock. And then also these two lines were made by the Smithsonian later, and they know this because there's an old picture where it doesn't have those lines, and then this picture does have those lines. So they know that these two lines and this mark are all new and not ancient. So what the Petrographic Services people did was, as well, they can compare. We know these marks are newer. They can look at these other inscriptions on the rock, and they can compare the weathering and other aspects of these engravings to the new engravings, and they can, by doing that, they might be able to see, do these look new like the new engravings, or do these look older or different than the newer engravings? And so that's what their focus was. And they did that. They used their microscopic services and things like that. I'll skip through part of what they did. Here they're focusing on the, actually, it looks like that one was on the back. of the stone. But nevertheless, there was one on the back. And then they were looking at the amount of weathering. And what they determined was that the inscription was much more weathered and cleared out than the newer markings. And so they said that the inscription does look ancient to them and not new. And I'll go ahead and show this. Okay, so there are interpretations here, and they're saying that when they looked at the inscriptions, they didn't see the silty clay type stuff that they saw in the newer ones. And so they said the inscription had to have been made prior to the excavation of the mound by John Emmert. And so they also, since the stone was underneath the head of the skeleton, obviously the stone had to have been there at the time of the burial with the inscription side down. So anyway, they found that it was consistent with it being ancient and not new. All right, and I'll go ahead and stop share there. Okay, so as I indicated, I'll look at other, in future videos, I'll look at other artifacts and the Hebrew writing and whether and the evidence that's related to it. I feel like the Back Creek Mound is the best, most reliable example of ancient Hebrew found on an ancient Native American artifact. And that's because it was done by the Smithsonian, which was hostile to the idea. And so the fact that they produced it, they authenticated it, makes it very reliable in terms of the sourcing and provenance. And the fact that they, in fact, displayed it at the Smithsonian for decades before deciding to remove it shows that they considered it authentic for decades. The arguments that John Emmert forged it just don't match up because he did not have the knowledge or ability to do that. And also there's no indication of any motivation for him to do it. In fact, he would have the absolute opposite motivation, because if he had produced an artifact that had been identified as having Hebrew, it would have jeopardized his job, since his boss was so hostile to the idea. And then just the analysis of the rock and the additional markings on it. For example, the word divider mark being something that was not known at the time as an authentic ancient Hebrew writing style, but as something that has since been found as something that could be used, also points to the authenticity. So I do feel like this is the best example of best example of proof for ancient Hebrew writing in North America. So even though the mainstream science doesn't accept this one either, I feel like the arguments for it are quite good. All right, so let me know if you have any thoughts or comments on it, and I look forward to sharing more videos with you. Please be sure to subscribe and hit like and the notification button as well. Thanks.